Today at the National Press Club, Deputy Prime Minister and Leader of the Nationals, Barnaby Joyce. With 10 days to go until polling day, Mr Joyce makes his pitch to rural and regional voters. Barnaby Joyce with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia and today's Westpac address. My name is Jane Norman. I'm a federal political reporter with ABC News and a director here at the club. Today's guest is the Deputy Prime Minister and Nationals leader, Barnaby Joyce. We appreciate your time taking a break from the Wombat Trail with the mascot alongside you. Mr Joyce is today making his traditional leaders' address during the campaign. Now, the Labor leader Anthony Albanese will be fronting the National Press Club next Wednesday. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, though, is still a TBC. It is long-standing tradition for the nation's leaders to come here and make an address at the National Press Club during or in the last week of the election campaign. So, PMO, if you're watching today, consider this an open invitation. Now, we are finally in the sprint to election day. Polls suggest Labor is on track for victory. So the coalition, including Mr Joyce, have just 10 days now to close what appears to be a widening gap. The Nationals are defending 16 lower house seats at this election, and the retirement of 3 members, or the defection of 1, retirement of 2 others, makes the job a little bit harder. Now, if you're following the conversation online, you can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PressClubAust and the hashtag is NPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce.
Well, thank you very much, Jane, and to my colleagues, Senator Susan McDonald, who's doing a power of work in Northern Australia, to Keith Pett, who's responsible for one of the primary mechanisms of the wealth of this nation and resources, to my ever-patient staff, who this time have given me the whole speech and not half of it, like they did last time, and to the Wombat, who blew a leg, but we managed to get it back on. It's the journalist. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, 400,000 people have already voted. And there is an assumption that nearly 2 million will have voted by the so-called election day. The people in so many instances have made up their mind, and this is in a frame of geopolitical uncertainty, global economic pressures, cost of living pressures, and it talks to a vision for our nation that can deal with these issues via policy. The election may be fought by politicians, but it is an expression of the fundamental democratic right of the Australian people. It is so obvious, but it has to be repeated. This is a political contest of ideas and policy. That you, the voter, make a judgment about what is the fairest, what is ultimately the safest, and what determines the future of your family and our nation. We know that popularity is not necessarily an attribute of good political leadership, and populism most certainly is not. Popularity is not even an indicator of who people will vote for. According to the 2019 Morning Consult survey, Senator Mitch McDonald, a Republican from Kentucky, had a 50% disapproval rating with registered voters. It's the second highest after Senator Susan Collins. But after this rather depressing polling, Senator McDonald won his Senate race by a margin of around 20 points. The reason was given that people prioritise state interests over candidate favourability. Senator McDonald's Democratic challenger, Amy McGrath, well, her campaign was based around being anti-McDonald and was said to be ineffective because it lacked a clear policy agenda. I think it's fair to say in this election that we don't want people to vote for the coalition because they think we are popular or I am popular. Instead, we want people to vote for us because we are strong, know where we are going, can make hard decisions to get there, and we can back hard decisions by showing you how we are going to pay for it. It is also fair to say that the Labor Party policy agenda has been less than inspiring, in some instances non-existent. They are more statements than policies because policies come with details. In a time of geopolitical crisis, popularity takes even more of a backseat to competency and strength. There is a responsibility on leaders to make tough decisions that are not necessarily popular. And to be quite frank, there is a responsibility on voters to understand that at times leaders have to make tough decisions. In this election, the Labor Party has presented one of the most policy-light election pitches in living history. It is summarised to this: they believe it is their turn. Anthony Albanese believes the Australian government is shared around like time with a skipping rope in a schoolyard, that you're entitled to be the government rather than putting forward a better policy agenda than the current government. In the past, Gough Whitlam brought forward the termination of military conscription, universal healthcare, free university education and legal aid programs. Bob Hawke, another Labor leader who won, came forward with the Prices and Incomes Accord, floated the dollar, gave the Commonwealth power over the World Heritage Sites, stopped the damming of the Franklin, outlawed gender discrimination in the workplace. These leaders didn't believe they were entitled to lead a government. They didn't believe it was their turn. They went out and fought for it and won the policy battle. Mr Albanese is hardly going to have his statue held high in the pantheon of great Labor leaders when it sits on a crumbling or non-existent policy pedestal. He's hardly gone to the Australian people and inspired them. It's almost as if he's in fear of his own political policy shadow. But maybe there is a policy agenda coming, and it's so philosophically left that the Labor Party is scared to talk about it before the 21st of May. Maybe those behind him are biting their tongues so hard because they're waiting to scream if they are lucky enough to get there. Because he hasn't brought forward a policy agenda, we haven't had a chance to debate it. So don't blame the assumptions of others when they fill the vacuum. That's what democracy is about. You fight for your policy and you pick holes in the opponents. And by so doing, you respect the electorate. Ultimately, that improves and refines the announced policy, and then the Australian people make a decision which they believe is best for them. The most competent in its administration is the best for the nation. But going to the Australian people and saying, I'm not them and it's my turn, is hardly Churchillian. This brings us to the independents, who are even worse. The independents, with their imperium and imperio approach, telling us that they are unique and righteous, but are actually the precursor to chaos. I can't think of one independent standing in a seat with a serious campaign against a Labor incumbent. Independents are only successful if the bulk of the other members of the lower house, the House of Representatives, are not independent. If all 151 in the lower house, House of Representatives, were independent, then the individual would be merely one discordant voice in a sea of chaos. A nation would be farcical in any form of government. We would be in an international laughingstock. 151 independents running around like senseless chooks. A ballot each day for the Prime Minister, a ballot for the Treasurer, a new defence policy each week, a budget that would be an incomprehensible bag of ideas with no underlying national plan. But independents believe that most people will do the right thing by their nation and vote in blocks for political parties, allowing them, the independents, to stand aside from the day-to-day, more effective political process, choosing what suits them at the expense of those who bind and stick to their party for the greater good. In essence, it is one word: selfish, with possibly a sentiment of entitlement residing below this. It is also fundamentally dishonest because they never disclose which side they would support if the vote came down to them. The thought that they don't actually know at this stage of a campaign which political side would get their casting vote in a hung parliament is totally implausible. Their electorate would be led like a sheep with the wool over its eyes, with the independents implying that their arbitrary promises would somehow be fulfilled, even though they are not a member of the Cabinet that makes the policy, nor of the Expenditure Review Committee that approves the money for it. Of course, the Governor-General would not concur that this could be a tenable form of government and would send us all back to the polls to try and sort this national mess out. For the more affluent electorates that in the past had a strong history of higher officers such as Menzies, who was the Prime Minister, and treasurers such as current Josh Frydenberg, well, with independents in line looking for those jobs, those senior ministries will be removed from those suburbs. I would be making a sobering appointment with their accountant to divine the effects of voting for the independents before they make their decision. In my portfolio, what is our agenda? Let's go around the country so I can repeat it for you once more. It is building the Pilbara, building an industrial city in our northwest so we can export more and earn more money to make us as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. When Port Hedland shuts down, our dollar goes down. We are building our third road, east to west, across Australia, a sealed road from Townsville to Perth that will assist in opening up the critical mineral precincts north of Alice Springs and the gold precincts in Laverton and Western Australia. It will also grow tourism in Alice Springs and help to move cattle more efficiently and with less stress on the stock heading to abattoirs or to other places. At first, people ridiculed the Alice Springs to Darwin railway line as a boondoggle, but now it is too small and needs to be expanded. This is a clear example of how infrastructure grows into its business case. To support the increased capacity of the rail line, we will build logistic hubs at Alice Springs, Tennant Creek and Katherine, and of course we will build a new industrial facility at Middle Arm in Darwin. We will build water infrastructure like Hells Gate Dam has requested 2.1 million megalitres. Sydney Harbour is 435,000. Requested as by Townsville Enterprise to help build up this citadel city of the north. We're building more dams to ensure there is enough water for mining businesses, for industry, for agricultural producers and for domestic use. Urana Dam near Mackay will be built to open up 20,000 hectares, it's around about 50,000 acres of a new agricultural precinct. The Bowen Pipeline, which we announced the other day, will link the Burdekin River Dam at Home Hill through Gumlu, through Gathalungra and onto Bowen. It will deliver up to 100,000 megalitres per annum of mid-security water into the region and boost horticultural production by up to $300 million a year from a further 40,000 hectares, which is around about 100,000 acres. We have decentralised government, such as the North Queensland Water Infrastructure Authority to Bowen. We know the APVMA to Armidale, but we'll move the North Queensland Water Authority from Canberra to Bowen, where the water is going to be utilised for agriculture. We will expand the Port of Bundaberg to load more sugar onto boats and send it to those who wish to pay for it. The expansion of Gladstone, a city proud of its industrial core, where so much of our coal and gas leaves our shores. I will make an announcement later in this speech about further expansion of this great industrial city. We're upgrading the alternative Inland Bruce Highway from Charters Towers to Mungandai, which will take the trucks off the Bruce Highway on the coast and onto the inland freight loop, a road that is flat, black and straight for the smooth run to Melbourne. Of course, we continue the construction of the Inland Rail from Melbourne through to Brisbane and on to Gladstone, the largest infrastructure project in Australia. It's a project, to be frank, that I negotiated back in 2016, and now we are driving with the Nationals to have it built as quickly as possible. And to do this, we are making hard decisions that reviews must stop and the construction must continue. Similarly, we must start Dungowan Dam in my own electorate. We will build on the wealth generated by the Port of Newcastle, the largest coal export port in the world. But it's not just investment in capital infrastructure that we must make. It is social infrastructure too. The expansion of allied health at La Trobe University in Shepparton for new occupational therapists, speech pathologists, nurses, midwives, to name but a few. I've opened up an oncology unit at Dubbo and a new training facility for doctors at Orange that have all been part of the plan, especially the Nationals plan, in making sure that health requirements for regional areas are fulfilled. We're expanding telehealth services for patients inland from a facility in Gladstone. Dr. David Gillespie has released a new regional health policy to get more doctors out of urban areas into regional towns. A regional health minister. There is no shadow regional health minister. This builds on what we have already done, such as the Murray-Darling Medical School Network, expanding medical training at the University of Newcastle, the University of New England, James Cook University in Cairns, and to start discussions about the further training of doctors at Charles Darwin University in the Northern Territory. We have announced social infrastructure, such as upgrading the Shepparton Sports Stadium, international sanctioned courts in Tamworth in the hope of inspiring the next Ash Barty, and we have already built a football stadium in Townsville for the North Queensland Cowboys. We're expanding basketball facilities in Ipswich, netball courts in Alice Springs and athletic facilities in Palmerston. For people to assist us in earning exports, they want to see the social infrastructure that says we respect their endeavours in doing this. The wealth of our nation comes from the soil of regional Australia, on it and under it. The Labor Party can't look beyond the inner suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne, and their campaign announcements have displayed this in their paucity for regional areas. We've seen the Labor's Catherine King come out and cast doubt on the future of the Inland Rail, with calls for delays and further reviews which slow the growth of the inland towns of Seymour, Parkes, Narrabri, Goondiwindi, Gladstone, as well as affecting the bookends of Melbourne and Brisbane. They have sneered at the appointment of a regional mayor as chair of Infrastructure Australia and put at risk the Building Better Regions Fund. They have announced a new tax for more than 200 businesses in Australia in the reduction of the safeguard mechanism, the safeguard ceiling, for which one is in Sydney, but 15 are in the Hunter Valley. 2 are in Brisbane, but 46 are in Central Queensland seats of Capricornia and Flynn. Very concerningly, they have decided to tax our last 2 oil refineries, which will either move offshore, over to Singapore, or hand the tax on to you when you pay for your fuel at the counter. This is hardly helping the cost of living that's so paramount in this election, and which our government is addressing with a reduction in the fuel excise. We also have, of course, the one-off payment for pensioners, veterans, and an increase to the low and middle income tax offset. The Greens, who the Labor Party will rely on for preferences, don't believe me, believe every how-to-vote card, want to cease almost immediately the mining of coal and gas. This is economic suicide for Australia. Where is the money that's lost going to come from? How does this plan work? Labor, once more, has given up on regional Australia. Labor is saying that Woolloomooloo policy will work for Wirrabonga, Walker and Western Australia. It won't. It's not that you disregard Woolloomooloo, but you must understand that Wirrabonga, Walker and Western Australia are distinctly different, with different requirements. We have the ridiculous position of the Labor candidate in the Hunter with his misunderstanding or misleading of his own party's energy policy, and at odds with the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen. The reason he's at odds is because his policy, Chris Bowen's policy, does not sell in the Hunter Valley. At the Sky debate, we had this candidate basically saying that his policy was different to his own party's policy. Is it confusion? Is it clumsiness? Or is it deceit? This is at a time of a new epoch for Australia, of a clear and present threat. Rear Admiral Raymond Perry Rogers, who was an officer in the United States Navy in the late 1800s and served as the head of the Office of Naval Intelligence and drafted War Plan Orange. It utilised the mechanism of island hopping, that is, establishing strategic positioning on specific islands in the Pacific Theatre. It became a prophecy of the future, beginning with the annexation of Hawaii, and later with Japan and the United States both utilising this process during the Second World War. The positioning of strategic forces on strategic islands to our north is not new. The common thread, though, is that it is used in military tactics to dominate your opponent. My grandfather was part of the infantry that went to Guadalcanal. China is now utilising the same tactical positioning, and it is an imperative in this campaign that the Australian people are fully aware of this. It is not alarmism. It is a reality, and we have to be awake to it. It's quite obvious. Through their desire to have military bases, they are starting a process of encircling Australia. And there is a wish, at the very least, to intimidate, or at worst, to supplicate Australia. Australia has a maritime vulnerability. We're a nation that is surrounded by sea. If you can stop imports and exports into Australia, you can stop Australia. We must regain sovereignty in this space. We must regain the capacity that we have an Australian maritime fleet that can sustain our imports and exports into our nation. Today, I announce that a re-elected coalition government will, within the first 6 months after the election, introduce measures to increase Australia's merchant capacity. The government will review Australia's tax arrangements for Australian ship owners to ensure they can compete on an even footing with foreign ship owners. This will include assessing the current income tax exemptions for companies and seafarers and exploring changes that will promote Australia's sovereign merchant capacity. We'll put arrangements in place to encourage ship owners to look to our regional neighbours for workers to complement the Australian workforce. We will implement changes to the Coastal Trading Act to remove red tape and increase the speed with which ship owners can service Australia. We saw a clear example of some of these when the Nullarbor, both rail and road was taken out, and we had to get groceries to Perth or they would run out. We did it, it happened, it fixed the problem. This plan will not only offer supply chain security, but also a significant economic benefit for Australia and help address a significant shortfall in work opportunities currently available to Australian seafarers. Both sides of politics have a role to play in order to protect our children, grandchildren and all future generations in how we deal with this. It will not be assisted by a Parliament of Independence. The military expansion of China is the biggest issue before us without a shadow of a doubt. I've been aware of this for quite some time, right back to the issues of foreign ownership, and I refer to my successful endeavours to stop Chinalco's, a Chinese state-owned enterprise, takeover of Rio Tinto, our largest iron ore exporter, back as far as 2009. Later, it was my support for changes to foreign investment laws which the Labor Party opposed. In fact, rather than decreasing the screening threshold of foreign purchase of agricultural land from 252 million to 15, which we did, the Labor Party wanted to increase the limit to $1 billion. One of the champions of this was Senator Penny Wong, today's alternate Foreign Affairs Minister. As a government, we have brought about the AUKUS arrangement between the United States, the United Kingdom and ourselves. We have begun the purchase of nuclear submarines to defend our nation in this increasingly volatile geopolitical environment. The Quad arrangement involving Australia, India, Japan and the United States is another example of our vision to build a strong partnership with like-minded nations. We are investing heavily in defence, which is now around 2% of GDP. We have made a $10 billion investment in cybersecurity, which you mightn't even be aware of, but is probably omnipresent in everything you do right now. As I've said to so many people, if you have my phone number, they've probably got yours. I could go on. The legitimacy to these moves is demonstrated in our most recent budget, a document that displays the government's source and application of funds. You see what we intend to do and you see how we intend to pay for it. In paying for it, you have to make hard decisions. You have to earn money. You have to understand how our nation earns money. This is where regional Australia is so important. 8 of our 10 largest exports come from regional Australia. Things like iron ore, coal, gas, beef, cotton, horticulture and grain, all the mineral and agricultural commodities coming out of regional Australia. The other 2, tourism and education, also are strongly represented in regional Australia. If you don't understand regional Australia, and the Labor Party doesn't, you don't understand how our nation makes money. The Labor Party and the Greens have noble ideas, such as restricting exports, but there is nothing currently to replace the hundreds of billions of dollars they earn from such things as coal or gas, or most recently, their desire to ban live sheep, which obviously is a precursor to banning live cattle, and then it'll go on to the transport industry. Banning these things is beyond folly, it's irresponsible. Statement about banning exports reinforces that the Labor Party does not know how our nation earns money and has come to this election with a narrative of restricting or banning exports. Rather, they should be coming to the election on how they should be expanding them. Exports underpin the standard of living you all enjoy, paying for services such as the NDIS, our defence spending, our healthcare, education, the ABC, law enforcement, pensions and infrastructure. Labor has said they have a strong belief in the defence of our nation. I believe that is a true statement. I don't doubt that for 1 second. I just completely doubt they've done the homework as to how they would pay for it. I fear that they will be pressured by the Greens and the left wing of their own party to obstruct the process of earning money to do just this. And they'll be confounded in the platform that such as the Greens put forward, which works completely against our capacity to defend our nation. We're exporting coal in record volumes and at record prices, earning in excess of $110 billion. And we're exporting gas, where we earn in excess of $70 billion this year. Where will the Labor Party, controlled by the Greens, find this money? And when they stop the export of these major commodities, the nation would become weaker and it would become poorer. As a person who trained and practiced as an accountant for nearly 20 years, I'm very familiar with the crucial document that is the cornerstone of any national financial analysis. It's a profit and loss statement. The first part tells you where you earn the money, and the second part tells you where you spend it. In assessment of whether a person should make a major purchase or expand or go into a new line of business, there is a forward look of the profit and loss statement, and this is called the budget. If you cannot provide a budget, the bank will not provide you with the money. If you cannot outline a budget, then you are possibly about to make a very foolish financial decision, as decisions based on gut feel rather than budget assessments often are. The reason why so many people come to Canberra on budget night is because they want to hear the government outline where they intend to earn the money from and where they intend to spend it. The budget is the seminal financial document for the operation of government in Australia. This brings us to the Labor Party under Anthony Albanese. In his budget reply speech, Mr Albanese did not outline his party's plan of how they intend to earn the money and how they intend to spend it. Neither he nor Jim Chalmers have never to this day provided that document. But ludicrously, they say to us they will present it after people have cast their vote. I would today like to congratulate, for instance, the journalist who asked Mr Albanese whether he supported a wage hike of 5.1% to keep up with inflation. The swiftness of his reply, absolutely, shows that the journalist is now a crucial cornerstone of the Labor Party's central economic team. Mr Albanese should understand that on-the-fly decisions can have deep repercussions and can actually work at odds with the job of assisting cost of living pressures by fanning the flames of inflation. Believe me when I tell you that if you go to a bank and say, trust me, lend me the money and I'll work it all out later, that's a surefire way for the bank to say no to you. In this instance, the body with the money is the taxpayer, the voter, the person and their progenitors are responsible for the servicing and repayment of debt. So they should be respected with a clear outline of what the Labor Party intends to do. Even in their promises, there are many holes, and I just want to focus on one, the Labor Party's grand housing policy. Every time somebody sells a home under this policy, they face a 40% housing tax as the government takes back its share. Even if you pay 100% for a renovation along the way, Anthony Albanese wants to take 40% of the capital improvement. In my inner core, I believe it's like Fidel Castro politics. The house owned by mum or dad, and the government. I don't know to this day, and maybe I've missed it, whether when they talk about a $90,000 limit, whether is that taxable income or gross income. It makes a huge difference, and it should have been fleshed out. This just underlines the chaotic nature of policy development. I now make another announcement of how our government shall proceed with the further growth of our economy. Today I announce $132 million in manufacturing grants that further go to the process of making our nation as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. I won't outline them all, but I will outline some. The war in the Ukraine has proven the crisis we have in fertiliser sovereignty. Without fertiliser, the unfortunate reality of so many Australian soils is that you won't have a crop. Yields would be halved. In some instances, they could lose up to 80% of what the soil in its natural condition actually produces. That is why we're investing $40 million on an inline blending plant in Gladstone to further enhance the city's industrial capacity and underwriting the agricultural capacity of our nation. New Farm is going to match this with expansion of their plant in Laverton in Victoria. In Gippsland, we will show the ingenuity of Australian business by funding an indoor recirculating aquaculture system to breed and process barramundi fillets. Barramundi from Gippsland is like rainbow trout from Darwin, but we can do it. And this is just to name a couple of projects. So let me conclude. This election is a case of whether voters wish to change the curtains or keep them to avoid the cost. As the current curtains work well, and no one has proven to us whether the replacements will keep the sun out of our eyes, keep the carpet from fading and stop other countries from peeking through the windows to see what we're up to. A AAA credit rating or a Labor alternative that can't even provide their own alternate budget. We've maintained our AAA credit rating while keeping people in jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic through such things as JobKeeper and JobSeeker. Yes, it has expanded our debt, but our nation with its AAA credit rating is in a small club with countries such as Switzerland and Norway. Our rating is higher than the United States, it's higher than the United Kingdom, it's higher than Japan. COVID taught us that a government that has the capacity to make decisions quickly, saves people's jobs, and does not get bogged down in a confusion of decision paralysis by reason of every independent having their dibs in a decision. Our government has set down a plan to build the infrastructure to inspire further growth of where we earn money. The alternative is a Labor government that has not said yes to virtually any of the investments that we have now noted, that we have now announced, that we now put forward before our nation as our plan to keep them in a safe position, in a strong position, in a prosperous position. To new dams, the third road across Australia, the Shepparton Sports Stadium, new allied health facilities in Shepparton, the expansion of export capacity in the Pilbara, the growth of a new Gladstone, a new industrial centre in our nation's northwest, as well as the expansion of our current Gladstone in Central Queensland. None of the Labor Party's central policy for regional Australia, as far as I can see, is a proposed carbon tax, where nearly all of the 200 existing businesses that will be taxed residing outside our capital cities. And one of the major ones inside the capital cities is our last two oil refineries. When you borrow money to build a capital asset for the nation, the asset remains on your balance sheet, bolstering our economic strength. When you borrow money that bakes in ongoing and recurring costs, regardless of the virtue of that expenditure, the money is basically gone. In the meantime, so many Australians have already voted. They were lined up before the opening of pre-polling, so it appears that many have made up their mind and are casting the vote of their choice. Understandably, many want to get back to their lives and jobs and taking the kids to sport, but we will campaign to the last minute on the 21st of May. More than any time in the 18 years since I was elected, this election determines far more than the balloons and tears and self-congratulatory orations at around about 10:30 on the evening of 21st of May. This really determines not only your future, but the future of your children and your grandchildren, and whether they will live in a nation with the same liberties and freedoms that we took as a birthright from this incredible luck of lottery, of life, when you were born in this exceptional nation called Australia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your address, Mr. Joyce. I wanted to ask you about popularity. You've asserted that it's not an important attribute for a political leader, but I would argue that in an election that we're having right now, it's a contest about character. So what voters think or what voters perceive of a leader is important in this contest, and it seems a lot of voters have made up their mind about Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, and they don't like him. As a person who, studies the polls and gets the pulse of the electorate, I'm wondering, why do people not like Scott Morrison? What has changed since that miracle victory in 2019 when voters endorsed him as Prime Minister?
I must be endowed with the gift of prophecy, because I actually put that in my speech. I came up with the analogy that you don't have to like your dentist. It's not important. You just have to believe they're competent. Because when they've got that drill in your mouth, you want to make sure they hit the right tooth. You don't want it through your tongue or through your cheek, because they're your mate. Competency is what matters. As an accountant, I didn't try to be mates with my clients. I tried to be competent so that they could get the best outcome and pay the least amount of tax. When I go to a mechanic, I don't find out if he's on one of my besties. I just want them to be able to fix the car. And running a nation is more complicated than all those jobs. So the people of Australia, they're not fools. They're making a decision about competency. They're making a decision about vision. They're making a decision about where this nation goes, and it is precarious times. We're not making that up. You see it on the television. Ukraine, China, inflation, cost of living pressures. People if it's a popularity contest, it'd be Married at First Sight, or My Kitchen Rules, or I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, right? And it's not. As far as my relationship with the Prime Minister goes, every agreement he has honoured, every one. And we're in a business relationship, and I'm an accountant, and I say, when I deal with this man, every agreement he honours. I never have to go and relitigate it or say, you know, you're slipping away from it. And that's what matters to me. So I say that back to the Australian people. That's what matters to me, and that's what must matter to you.
Sure, but by making the dentist analogy, you're effectively conceding that Scott Morrison's personal standing is an issue. Like, everybody's repeating this dentist analogy, and I get it, but I'm wondering what's changed. Why do people not like Scott Morrison after electing him 3 years ago? Like, what's happened in the past 3 years in your view?
Well, the issue I'm saying is it's kind of irrelevant. It doesn't... the premise is that you say it sways votes in an exceptional manner, and I don't concur with the premise. I don't believe it does. I believe the Australian people are smarter than that. You know, there's some, like, if it's popularity, I think you're going to find politicians in Canberra who are more popular than the Prime Minister, most certainly more popular than me, more popular than Mr Albanese, more popular than Richard Marles, more popular than Senator Penny Wong, or Katie Gallagher. I don't know who's going to be the Prime Minister. I'm trying to work it out. Gosh, it could be anybody. It could be George Christensen, but he's gone. I mean, you know, if it was a popularity contest, I mean, what an idiotic process that we're before us. And because none of the people, the major candidates, are actually very popular.
According to the opinion polls, you might be onto something there. Let's go to our first question. Krishani Danji from SBS.
Krishani Danji from SBS. Thank you for your address. Deputy Prime Minister, your government's criticised the so-called Teal independents for not declaring who they would vote for or support. But if there is a hung parliament and the Teal independents are involved in negotiations with the coalition, they might call for the coalition agreement to be made public. Under what circumstances would the Nationals agree to such a request, and shouldn't that agreement be transparent so Australians know what's in it?
No, because why? Because in my discussions to get the best deal for regional Australia, I don't want to have to ventilate every iteration, every nuance, day by day within the media. When I go into bat for regional Australia on behalf of the party I'm part of, the Nationals, I'm going to make sure that I don't sort of fulfil other people's desires in getting the best outcome for regional people. And so that process, and a lot of the times you'd find the document rather unremarkable. And but
well, then why not produce it?
Well, because that's fulfilling your desire, not regional Australia's desire. So you want a straight answer? The answer's no, I won't.
But you've called for Teal independence to be transparent.
No, I'm asking for... I'll tell you what you will know from me. I am going to support Mr Morrison and the Liberal Party to form a government. 100%. I say to the Australian people, if you vote for the Nationals, we will work with the Liberals to form government and keep this nation in safe hands. That wasn't too hard. That was quite easy. So what happens to these independents, these righteous people? I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's so implausible. They're the most fun... Actually, it's the only thing they can tell you that they will do. Because they're not actually a minister, so they can't really tell you about policies. They'll announce policies, but it's patently absurd for anybody who understands the machinery of government. They're not in cabinet, they're not in the policy construction, they're not in the expenditure review that comes forward with the money. They're not even responsible for getting access to the parliament in how it's debated, in the agenda. So saying these things in the street, which they'll be doing, you know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do something else. The reality is people have got to ask them, well, how are you going to do that? When are you a cabinet minister? I didn't know that. You're not even elected. You're already a cabinet minister. Congratulations, well done. Feat of brilliance. And then the obvious thing that they actually can answer, the one question they can answer is people say, if there was a hung parliament, I just want to know because it's my vote. Am I voting for the Labor Party, which probably has to go to business with the Greens? The Greens are very open about it. Have a look at their ballot. Everyone knows exactly who they're supporting. Or am I voting with the Nationals and the Liberals? You have a right to know that. It's the most fundamental question that you should answer, but they don't. Excuse me.
Next question, Greg Brown from The Australian.
Mr Joyce, in your speech you said that Labor was being deceitful for saying something in the Hunter Valley different...
I'm still listening. Just hold on. Yep, keep
different to what it was saying in the cities. But what we're seeing at the moment is Nationals MPs saying that they support a coal-fired power station in Central Queensland, Liberal MPs saying it's never going to happen. We're seeing you say that you want more coal mines in the Galilee Basin. Yep. Scott Morrison has refused to say that when he was asked at a press conference in this campaign. And we've seen your candidates say that net zero emissions is flexible, Nationals candidates, and Liberal MPs say that's not right.
Okay.
So isn't it the coalition being more egregious at talking out of both sides of your mouth? And given the issues with Liberal MPs facing more climate-conscious constituents, does that make the coalition agreement between the Liberals and Nationals more vulnerable?
No, don't love it. You get a bleeding nose at the press club. Anyway, no, it doesn't, because what we are doing is both the Labor Party and ourselves are talking about but we've got to make sure our nation earns as much money as possible. And we can't do that if we shut down coal exports. So what they're saying is completely in line where our policy is. We're saying that you've got to understand global demand. Global demand for coal is a sign that the world is still buying it. If the world doesn't buy it, we won't be selling any, but they are buying it, and they're buying it in record amounts.
Coal-fired power stations, your MPs are saying that that there will be a coal-fired power, or they support a coal-fired power station in Central Queensland. Liberal MPs are saying it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Like, how is that an honest conversation?
We're actually we have undertaken the business case for a coal-fired power station at Collinsville. That is the process that is at foot. Now, whether in how that comes to a conclusion, or whether it comes to a conclusion by reason that we've basically used the money that that was allocated to do it, is this discussion. So when you say, are we going through the assessment of coal-fired power station in Collinsville, that is actual policy. There is a business case that would have been undertaken on that.
But the company says it needs an extra 2.5 million.
So that's actually the essence of your question, Greg. You're saying, are you going to allocate more money to a business case for a coal-fired power station, not whether you agree with a business case for a coal-fired power station, because there is a business case that is partially done on a coal-fired power station for Collinsville. And now we have to come to the question of, do we allocate more money to that? And there's a whole realm of other things that we need to consider.
All right, might just pause for a moment, because Mr. Joyce, I apologise. You're on stage with a blood nose, but here are some tissues if you'd like to just can you move away for a moment.
Yeah,
sorry about that,
guys.
A very brief interlude while the Nationals. Yes, well, actually, Keith, if you want to take the stand, we'll just be a moment. Apologies for this. In a moment, we'll resume questioning. Apologies for this.
Sorry about this. I don't know what's going on.
All right.
But you're just going to have to
push through.
I know you're going to get 1,001 photos of me with clinics to my nose. Well done, congratulations. But the alternative is I'd leave. So
look, we appreciate you staying. Feel free to just take a break when you need it, but we'll persevere with questions. The next one is Jacob Grieber from the Fin Review.
Thank you. Yes, I guess politics is a blood sport, but I wasn't quite expecting this.
Just written the headline.
Mr. Joyce, Jacob Grieber from the Australian Financial Review. I don't think it's remarkable to say that your job as National Party leader is to win National Party seats first and government second. Some of your Liberal colleagues say they're paying a very high price for the perception that you're not ambitious enough on climate change. What would you say to those Liberal colleagues and the coalition voters who vote for them if they end up losing? Will you be overseeing a Pyrrhic defeat?
Pyrrhic defeat.
Pyrrhic defeat.
No. Look, let's just have a look. Our nation is an honourable nation. Why? Because we make agreements and we stick to them. We've honoured every agreement. Right now, Boris Johnson says he wants to take a break from his 2050 target. Germany and Italy are firing up their coal-fired power stations again. There was $35 billion in fossil fuels that €35 billion, that the European Union bought off Russia in the first month of the Ukraine crisis. They only put $1 billion worth of aid to €1 billion of aid into the Ukraine. This is the reality of the world. We're exporting. China, which produces half the coal in the world, their last 2 quarters were records amount, record production in coal. But what our nation does, and what's so good about us, and this is why we're so diligent, is we make promises and keep to them. We're doing that. So when we do this, we make sure that we've nutted out as how we're going to get there, how we keep our economy stable. And right now you're seeing it. We're developing an alternate industry, not a transition, alternate. And the alternate is hydrogen. We've invested vastly more in hydrogen through the campaign than the Labor Party has. They haven't even got our investment in renewables is massively ahead of theirs. And so, you know, when the truth is understood, we're a noble nation who abides by their agreements when other nations are stepping away. And through this campaign, we've invested more in an alternate industry, in the hydrogen industry, than the Labor Party, which, to be quite honest, I don't quite know what their alternate industry they're investing in. What they have talked about is transition. And in regional areas, transition is read as unemployment, transitioning to unemployment. Their policy is to reduce the safeguard mechanism. We have a safeguard mechanism. It's like the ceiling on this. It's out of the way, but it stops you going through the roof. They're going to bring the ceiling down to about head level for tall people. And there's going to be around 213, 215 of them who are going to start belting their heads on the fans and the lights and be a new tax placed on them. We can't have that. So, you know, we have an honourable position, a logical position. Gabby.
Can I just pull you up just before we go to Gabrielle Chan from the Guardian on the safeguard mechanism? Look, it's a sort of pointy policy in climate change terms. Labor is basically matching your safeguard mechanism, but effectively lowering the threshold. But isn't it the fact that at the moment you're not actually enforcing the safeguard mechanism? So the companies that are subjected to it are just continuing to emit beyond their baseline?
No, what it is, even within the policy, is the process of assessment and negotiations of certain sections and exceptional times of how the baseline works. There are a number of ways you can define the baseline and work it. But the whole point of the ceiling is for precisely, it was a ceiling. It was to stop emissions being let off the hook and going through the roof. That's what it was about. But what they've brought in is not a ceiling. They've brought in like a cave with a low roof. And they're going to keep winding it down. And they haven't actually put forward a policy of an alternate industry. See, we want to develop an alternate industry so that in the future, people can make a choice. They can make a choice whether they want to stay in one job where they're paid $130,000, $140,000, such as you'll get in the coal industry, or go into the hydrogen industry, which is $130,000 or $140,000. That's completely different to saying to someone, I'm just going to kick you to the curb. I'm going to tax you out of a job. And if you work with the Greens, I'm going to put you out of a job basically straight away. They're two completely different approaches. So they might be using the terminology of our safeguard mechanism, but by God, it's not keeping people safe when they use it.
All right, next question, Gabrielle Chan from The Guardian.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your speech. I want to take you back to the weatherboard and iron, because I know you feel strongly about that.
Yes, I do. Like rusted off.
A little bit like rusted off. The National Rural Health Alliance estimates there's about $4 billion that rural Australia is missing out on because of the lack of services and staff.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to get a GP in rural Australia right now. People are starting to regular book every couple of months to collect their ailments because they can't get there when they're sick. Telecommunications has been dodgy for a long time, and notwithstanding the bit of money that was thrown out in this campaign in response to the Regional Rural Telecommunications Review, there hasn't been a lot that's been done over the last decade since you've been in government. We're going into an inflationary environment and people have high exposure to debt because regional housing prices are running through the roof. Rentals are short. I think in one of your local towns, Tamworth, it's about 0.07. 0.7 is the rental vacancy.
I'm with you, Gabby. I just got so it's a health question and we've got a rental question.
No. So we've got those conditions, right?
Yeah.
In the meantime, the thing that you're known for most, right across the country,
is Johnny Depp's dogs.
No, well, no. There's something more than that. It's the $100 roast, and it's the prosecution of the climate wars.
Yep.
And so while you've been off on the kind of climate frolic, these traditional services that we need in rural Australia are lost.
Yeah.
So given the recent intervention by your Senator Matt Canavan on net zero
Long
being
question, Gabby.
dead, I know, I have long
Got a
questions.
bleeding nose.
I've got so many questions. I'm told that the Nats went backwards in all of their seats after Senator Canavan's intervention. So haven't you, given those conditions, failed on your key KPIs in terms of representing the bush?
I'm getting a sense you're not voting for me.
Michael McCormack's my local member.
Look, Gabby, there's a whole range of your questions that I just don't agree with. And I think I'll deal with them in seriatim. Okay? First thing is that we've done massive investments into health. Back in 2016, the Nationals, and it's great to see Kay Hull here, we actually negotiated for the Murray-Darling Basin Medical School. It's a regional health facility. It was with the Nationals, right back to John Anderson, we started expanding our capacity for health studies at Newcastle. We'll continue. I've been up to Darwin. We're talking about the expansion of what we're doing at Charles Darwin University. It was merely 2 weeks ago. I was in Shepparton, and it was allied health, investment in that, in opening that up. We've got Dr. David Gillespie. As I said, we have a regional health minister. The Labor Party have a minister for the Republic. So when we go to take you to a hospital, when you go to a hospital, our idea is to get your blood pressure down. Their idea is to take a photo of the Queen down. You know, what we are doing, and in its health policy, it's about the movement of doctors out of urban areas, where we say to you, you work in a regional area, we take a year off your HECS bill. You work in a very remote regional area, we take 2 years off your HECS bill. These are policies that are not Labor policies, they're our policies.
Why are there 80 doctors
Hang on, you've got to let me get to the end, otherwise we don't have a press conference, we have a debate, and we'll just have to get 2 chairs up here.
I wouldn't mind.
So that is just not correct. And as I pointed out in my speech, the telehealth process. So I remember talking to Dr. McPhee, who's looked after the people of Emerald for around about in excess of 30 years, making sure that people, even they can't, they get access. So, Gabby, we put in our negotiations with the Liberal Party in excess of about $66 million to get new magnetic resonance imaging machines into regional areas. So if someone's got cancer in a regional area, we can find out about it sooner and get them the treatment. And I can go on and on and on, Gabby. We can go and show you how with the expansion of also our prescriptions. So when you get prescriptions, you pay less amount of money if you're a pensioner. These are all part of our health policy. Do we have a challenge as we go forward? Yes, we do. Are we trying to address it? Yes, we are. Have we released a policy on it? Yes, we have. Have we got a regional health minister? Yes, we do. Have we seen the alternative from the Labor Party or the Greens? No, we haven't. And now on the next issue, when you say these things make people unpopular, so many times I read in the paper, when I know the polling and I hear something, I go, someone's been fed like a chook. They've given them something and they've just swallowed it whole. And you say, I know the polling, it's not right. What they said then, it's not right. You know, especially when it goes to polling and say, these seats don't like you. You go, I know the polling they do.
Oh, so that's wrong. Polling's wrong.
So what I acknowledge is that yes, in certain areas where there is a soft vote, especially in urban areas, they want to understand that the Nationals have made a commitment with the Prime Minister, and we're sticking to it, right? And there's your answer.
Thank you.
All right, the next question, Dominic Giannini from AAP.
Dominic Giannini from AAP. Just, sorry, to follow on that they don't know the policy. You mentioned Labor's housing policy, but a few assertions there were incorrect. So is your attack on Labor based on, incorrect assumptions? And then, sorry, just to quickly go back to independence, it seems that the Liberals are negotiating more with yourself than they are with the crossbench, and you still have outspoken senators voting how they say they're going to vote. So what's the difference between negotiating with a Teal independent and negotiating with a coalition backbencher?
Well, the difference is the coalition backbencher has said they support a coalition government. When they went to the people, they said, if you vote for me, I will be supporting the Nationals and the Liberals on supply and no confidence, and by so doing, giving them the capacity that the Prime Minister-elect to go to the Governor-General and say, I've got the numbers. That's a very big difference. What Teal people do is they say, I'm not going to tell you that. And you say, well, hang on, who am I voting for? I don't get it. Am I voting for possibly Mr Albanese being the Prime Minister, or possibly Mr Morrison? No coalition backbencher has ever gone to their people before an election and said, well, although I'm in the National Party, it might be up for grabs. People know, no, I vote for them. I know that it's important that they're my local member, but it's also equally important that I know who the government's going to be. And that is the massive difference between ourselves. And if independents want to actually nominate and say, look, okay, you vote for me, and I can tell you right now, straight up and down, I'll be with the Labor Party, or straight up and down, I'll be with the coalition. I just want you to know that. And you say, well, okay, to be quite frank, now it's difficult for us because they're being upfront, but they're not. And the other thing behind that is they're saying they're coming forward with all these policies that they want, and the obvious question is they work on the theory that the people they talk to don't understand what they call the machinery of government, where people should be saying, how are you going to do that? You're not a minister. You're not in a party with a minister. There's no joint party room where you go. How are you going to convince someone in a cabinet, which if you walked into it unannounced, you'd get arrested? How does this work? How do you do these marvellous things? This is a job for Inspector Clouseau. How do you do this?
We're running out of time, so just make your polite
I'm running out of blood.
Yes. We'll need to get you a steak after this. But I just wanted to pick you up on this idea about negotiating with independents, etc., because the argument that's been put forward is that would lead to chaos in the parliament. Yeah. We've only got to go back to February when your own side were holding up the government's agenda because of vaccine mandates, and your own side basically toppled the Religious Discrimination Act. So when you're talking about chaos in parliament, I mean, we've already got it.
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
You couldn't get your own agenda through.
No, we haven't. Obviously, what you're talking about is a singular issues or one issue. If you've got independence, you're going to have it every day. You're not going to have small iterations from time to time, very rare and infrequent. It's going to be a daily thing. Every day it'll be magic. I don't know. Is something going to go through? Maybe not. And therefore, who suffers out of that? The Australian people. And once more, I go back to this. If independents are the way to go, if that is the righteous, proper process for the government of our nation, then let's have 151 of them. It will be total and utter chaos. See, the independents work on this theory. They go, all these people will play by the rules and so will those, and I'll just play in the middle and bargain off both sides. You say, well, hang on, that's actually selfish, because these people are doing, the Labor Party are being strong and binding and sticking for their nation, and the Nationals and Liberals are being strong and binding and sticking for their nation. And you've got people in the middle who really is a sense of entitlement as politicians, where they go, I'm a little bit special. I'm a little bit different. Special house, special car, special type of politics. And I can just sort of make my mind up because I'm better than you all. And it's so let's, as I say, you pose, the ultimate justification or focus on them. If independents are the way to go, we'll have a nation of 151 of them. We will be an international laughingstock. Government will be a total farce. Nothing will happen. And those who wish to do us harm will be laughing all the way to the battleships.
All right, next question, Katina Curtis from the SMH and The Age.
Thanks. Probably following a similar theme, would you reserve your right to renege on a coalition deal you strike with the Liberal Party, depending on what guarantees might have to be given to a crossbench in a hung parliament, or alternatively, would you seek to have in that coalition agreement a veto over those deals with the crossbench?
Well, I mean, these things are hypothetical, and I think you just open a can of worms when you go down that process. The Nationals will obviously, because we're a different party, we negotiate our coalition agreement with the Liberals. And other negotiations I don't know of, I have no party to, and I'll let other people make the decision about.
Right, next question, Julie Hare from the Australian Financial Review.
And a Director of the National Press Club. Thank you, Mr Joyce. The Coalition is said to have a woman problem. It's not just a lack of female representation in the Coalition, but a slew of incidents involving Coalition men. Why should the women of Australia vote for the Coalition?
Well, let's look at our party. You know, if we had a quota system in the Senate, we'd need more blokes because there's 80% women. I'm looking at Kay Hull, who's president of our party, and she's a woman. In the positions that we've, like government positions that we go through the process of selection at Cabinet, it's about 50-50 now in women. And we are making sure all the time that we do a better job. We had the Jenkins review to look into these issues regards women and regards bullying. And we've seen issues that all of us can be better. Obviously, you know, we've had some unsavoury incidences and they have to be dealt with so they don't happen again. And the Labor Party got theirs too, you know, with the Kimberley Kitching issues and the things that surround them. You know, all these things we can do, all of us can do better. But, you know, we did, and I've, for my part, in trying to make sure we fought so that so people who had some serious issues in the Parliament could get access to a proper process of investigation of records so they could prosecute their case. And doing that quietly from the backbench, and then having that unfortunate thing that one of my emails was leaked by a third person. I can never work out why that's been utilised for a political point when it was done for such a personal reason to try and help a person. These issues we will continue to work on, and right now with going around with candidates such as Jacinta Price, you know, brilliant Indigenous woman who's going to add so much to bring forward issues, especially from bush communities, and how we can do a better job there, and how we can, you know, we haven't reached any point where we stop. We've got further to go, and we continue on with that work.
And final question today, Andrew Tillett, also from the Financial Review.
And Vice President here at the club. Mr Joyce, just two quick issues. On the wages increase, we know that regional seats incomes are much lower. You probably have more people more reliant on minimum and award wages in those environments. Yeah. What is a reasonable wage increase for those people to expect this year, particularly given cost pressures in regional Australia through housing? And secondly, just in your speech, you've said about China wanting to encircle Australia being the biggest issue, its militarisation being the biggest issue on the ballot paper. You also say we need to understand as a nation how we generate wealth in this country. We do that by selling a heap of iron ore to China, which gets turned into things like, can get turned into things like warships, submarines. How do you reconcile the tension there between, on one hand, effectively taking Chinese money for our goods, at the same time potentially arming China, helping arm China?
Yeah, look, yes, it's a vexed issue, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, what China will respect is strength. That's why I say we've got to become as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. And respecting strength means that you have to be strong across all facets of what you do. You have to be strong in agriculture. You have to be strong in mining. You have to be strong in education. You have to understand that people are going to assess the strength of Australia in a holistic form, not just your military. That's just one section of it. And you can't have a strong military if you don't have a strong economy. You just can't pay for it. So, yeah, this is something that is, we believed in the past in a rules-based order. We believed in the past that countries just didn't arbitrarily invade other countries. We believed in the past that people were basically peaceful and won't be a threat to one another. And recently, that has changed. That has changed. And we have people, you know, in the Ukraine where women having a baby, just with a baby in a maternity hospital, were put into the basement. Then the building was bombed, where they wrote the word children inside, so they bombed it. Where we now have tens of thousands of people dead. Where a country just decided to invade a democracy of 44 million people. And that was a bell ringer for the whole world. Now, one of the issues with that is their problem as well. Their energy requirements are coming out of Russia. 40% of their energy requirements. So the problem that we've got is probably the problem that a whole heap of people got. But what we want is peace. Wars are disgusting, horrible things. From a family where we've got 3 generations, I was only in the reserves, but 3rd generation of people in the services on both sides. But this is something that the only way we can deal with that is to be strong. People respect strength. And that's how we keep our children and our grandchildren safe. And we've got to earn money. If we don't have the capacity to bring the money in to bolster up the finances of the nation, because remember, we earn it from tax revenue. It comes back, pays for your NDIS, pays for your Social Security, all the things you need, as well as defence. We won't be strong. And right now, I remember talking to one of the large miners, and this goes to show you sort of a salutary lesson about what's happening in the world. I was talking about iron ore exports and China, and said, "Oh, we've got a big new customer," and I was trying to pick it, and they went, "Germany. Germany's a big new customer." And I imagine Germany's using the iron ore for a whole range of things. And of course, one of the other things Germany's doing, and this is so scary, they're rearming. That's the world we live in. Whoever thought you'd stand at a press club and a podium and be talking about things such as that?
And just not to bring it back down, but wages was the other question. What would be a fair wage rise? Anthony Albanese's nominated 5.1%. That'd be pretty appealing to the 2 million Australians.
Yeah, but I know, but it just becomes inflationary. See, two things happen this is so idiotic. See, if you go and say, I'm going to have a 5.1% wage rise, I tell you, 2 things are going to happen. The businesses that can are just going to put it on the price of their product, on their groceries, on their services, your mechanics, your accountant's bill. They'll say, fine, bang. I'm an accountant. Say, what, you want 5.1% for everyone here? Sure. Show me your accountancy bill. I'll bang it on that. You know what that's called? Inflation. Inflation. You've just gone out and inspired inflation. And, you don't make decisions on the fly. Now, what we've got unemployment around about 4%. It's going to go lower. And I can assure you in regional areas, if you don't pay the right amount of money, that person just walks to another job very, very quickly. And I tell you what we want to do is keep staff, not lose staff. And the only way you keep staff is they will come in. They're in a much stronger bargaining position now, and it is happening. As regards housing, there's 2 sides to this. First of all, housing, especially in regional areas, remains cheaper, and people are moving to regional towns, and even in Tamworth. One real estate agent telling me 1 in every 4 houses that he sells now is to someone from Sydney, and they come up not really worried about getting a job, but they know they'll get one, and they do. And now, how do you deal with that? In many instances, it's supply and demand. You've got to release more land if you want to build more houses. If you restrict the access to land, you restrict supply. Economics 101, prices of houses go up because there's more of demand for a smaller pool of houses. We have to make sure that in other areas that we bring the economic benefit to areas where houses are cheaper. And I'll give you one example, Werris Creek, where I bought, as I've mentioned before, people laugh, I bought my first house. I think it was about $71,000 and I sold it for $67,000. Not a very good financial decision. But what we have done there is built Kupoli Dam. And that's brought access to the town to a stronger water supply. And now we have Crawfords in there with a big terminal that's also expanding and bringing more business into the area. And this is the sort of things we've got to do. In developing regional areas, we've got to make sure we take the jobs into those other regional towns. And this is another reason why we support agriculture, which is so vitally important. I went through the projects there, but also mining. And also making sure we have water security on the Murray-Darling. Because if you don't have water security, Shepparton loses their jobs. If you don't have mining security, Gladstone loses their jobs. If you don't have agricultural security, Tamworth loses their jobs. And this is this wide panacea that the Nationals have to manage. We must be doing all right because we're growing as a party.
Right, and with that, please thank Barnaby Joyce for today's Press Club address.